name is James. I'm the CTO of Centauri AI. I currently work on all of the code for our little startup, and most of my day-to-day work has to do with choosing vendors, building platforms, setting up databases, writing code, testing, and debugging. I make all of the decisions on whether or not we adopt a specific vendor in order to set up permissions or authorization, authentication. So Centauri AI, we build a product that allows financial analysts, usually quants, to look through a large number of PDF files, usually in the hundreds or thousands, very quickly, which reduces much of the manual labor. So we use AI to look through those PDFs very efficiently, and we allow the analysts to create templates as well as automation workflows for them to be able to finish their work very quickly. Most of our customers are within the finance industry, and they are usually managing some sort of asset that they already have. And tied to those assets are usually company reports and financial information, and we help users look through those PDFs very quickly. They're all enterprise clients, and they're usually teams of about anywhere between 3 to 10. We don't deal with individual users very often. All of our sales process is business to business. So prior to Permit, I worked at a couple of startups around the Bay Area, and almost all of them had their own in-house built authorization and authentication systems. And from a lot of those companies, I've learned how to do it, but also how not to do it. I think building a security system is very important, and it doesn't need to be done every single time you start a brand new company. The kind of authorization system that we had at Centauri before we adopted Permit was actually very basic. We used tables in Postgres in order to keep track of resource ownership. That took a lot of effort in order to maintain as the permission system got much more complex and we had to support use cases such as sharing. So we started looking at Permit because I didn't want to rebuild an authorization system that I've already built several times. I just wanted to go and use a service that already worked out of the box. With our existing system, it was very simple because we just kept everything in Postgres database tables. But the downside of that is that the complexity of those tables grew very quickly as our customers requested for additional permissions. And I thought, hey, we can go and build it in-house. We can build it ourselves. I'll probably turn it into a microservice. But if I'm going to go and do that, then maybe someone has already done the work for me. For us, the biggest challenge was looking into the complexity of the system as well as customer demands. Having good security is a must. And we found that if security is easy to understand, then it's much easier to implement for our developers as well. And it's much easier to audit. It's much faster to go and develop features that require security. And we found that by condensing all of our security logic into a single service, such as Permit, it saved us a lot of time to not have to think about security while we're focused on the application behavior. Most of our customers are not technically, let's say, they're very quantitative and they're very smart, but they're not necessarily the most technical people. And everybody has a good sense of the need for security, but it's hard to find someone who has the in-depth knowledge to know how to implement it properly. So for us, working with customers in finance, we must guarantee trust and security for all the products that we share with them. But at the same time, we also need to explain to them why it is they need this level of complexity around security. And the less complexity that we have to explain, the better. So because our users are not necessarily tech savvy, we need to explain to them in a short period of time how their data is going to be handled and also how resources within our app are going to be shared between their users. If we make the security system way too complex, then they need to learn that system. And they'd rather be spending their time working on their own companies rather than focused on how one of their vendors is handling their security. Having Permit simplifies a lot of the control plane for granting permissions to users for us and allow us to focus on building applications rather than explaining the security to our customers. So we found Permit through Google as well as some Reddit threads and G2 reviews. And we found that Permit filled this role where it's not so complex that it's hard to understand, but it's also advanced enough in its feature set to be able to give us the ability to create additional application features without having to implement the sharing logic ourselves. So we can have something as complex as like the Google Drive sharing system, but we don't have to come up with any of the code. It was hard to find another vendor that matched that sweet spot between complexity and simplicity. So I've worked with other types of RBAC role-based access control systems in the past where you go and define documents that specify who can access what, given which conditions. And I've always found that even though those systems are extremely powerful, the more complexity you add to the solution, the more that you have to go and teach it. You're not only teaching it to yourself, but you're also teaching it to all the engineers who work in your organization. You're trying to evangelize them to think more deeply and care more deeply about security. And the more that they have to learn, the harder it is to get them to actually care. You're also teaching it to all of the product people as well as to the salespeople so that when they onboard new customers, they do it right. But at the same time, you still want to have some guarantees that you can send over to your sales team to make sure that your customers feel good about your product and the security systems that you're using. So when I thought about all of those factors, whether or not to use an RBAC system, I didn't want to teach them all of that complexity. But still, I wanted to have a flexible and powerful enough system that they can use in order to onboard users. We ended up settling with Permit because it had the same amount of power as being able to manage those role-based access documents, but without needing to have the headache of teaching people how those role-based access policies actually work. So we actually got Permit running on production on the same day where I started reading the docs. After we found Permit through Google, I literally just downloaded the PDP container, which is used to proxy as well as cache some of the permission check requests. And from there, we just made a call to the PDP container whenever we needed to check if a user had permissions to go and open a file. After I was able to get that working on my local machine, we created a PR for it and then we shipped it the same day. It took us all of one day to go and implement it and maybe another day to just go and deploy it onto staging and production and run of our tests, and it worked like a charm. So one thing that I was specifically looking for when finding a permission system is the control plane for the permission system. Because if you have a robust product, then people aren't necessarily changing permissions every time, but users, both internal as well as external, they need to be able to see as well as audit all of the access that's going on. We could go and build that out ourselves and create UI for allowing internal and external users to review permissions. Sometimes they need to go and do it for auditing as well as compliance. And we could go and build a system for audit logging, but why build it when someone else has provided it as a service and you can pay a couple of cents per API call in order to use this much more well thought out system than what you would have originally ended up with. So the key pain point that Permit solved for us is that we no longer have to go and build all of those UI and audit logging systems ourselves, and instead we can have a relatively mature user-friendly interface to allow our product and sales teams to go and onboard additional users, as well as for the users to manage their own permissions without us having to go and build it. We are using Permit's API in order to just make permission checks on whether or not a user has the permissions to perform an action against a resource. We're not so much using dynamic roles at the moment. I think most of our roles are fairly simple with just an admin role, a read-write, and a read-only role. I think in the future, when we start to have sharing of resources between users, we would very much take advantage of the dynamic roles as well as resource-based permissions. So right now in our application, we try and keep it very simple of having read-write access, read-only access, and then admin level access. So admin level access is usually reserved for our internal users in order to debug products. For our customers, our product is currently pretty simple with its permission system, but in the future, we would like to be able to build the ability to share resources between users as well as manage permissions on a per resource level. And we really don't want to go and build that system ourselves. We would very much like to keep all of those access policy documents as well as data in some sort of a separated system. So Permit provides that service for us without us needing to write it ourselves. We are using a local PDP because latency is very important for us. If every single time a user has to load a page, we have to go out to the internet to go and fetch some third-party API to see whether or not the user has a resource, and then all come all the way back to the application, then that round-trip latency is a lot of times much higher than the application latency that it takes to produce a response. If adding security to the application requires additional latency, then a lot of times developers will just skip adding security to the application, which is even worse. So if a security system is not fast to respond, then it's not really a secure system. That's why having a local PDP is extremely important for us. Instead of going out to the internet to go and fetch your response, you can get it in a matter of single-digit milliseconds because you're just talking to a sidecar container that's running on the same machine that you are. Our load is, I guess our traffic volume is pretty low compared to a lot of other startups because we are a B2B and our user count is relatively low. However, a single user might be able to perform multiple actions all at the same time. We've seen that Permit handles our load pretty well, although our requests per second is in the tens per second, rather than in the hundreds or thousands. We are using Permit with Auth0. So Auth0 provides the authentication information for us so that we know which user is whom. And Permit does the rest of associating that particular user identification information with the permissions that the user has access to. We don't have a direct integration via like a plugin or anything, but we do populate data directly from Auth0 into Permit. They serve very different roles, and I'm very happy that they work well together because you're just passing strings around. It's a simple system, and simple systems are much easier to understand. One thing that we appreciate about Permit is that it frees us up to go and build the application rather than think about security on every single route. When you have a web application and you have multiple API routes, every single one of them needs to be secure just a little bit differently. Maybe you're looking at a resource that's associated with another resource that's associated with another resource, and then that resource is associated with the user. And we don't want to spend all of our time thinking about how all of these resources are linked up together. We would rather just tell a system, hey, this person has access to this sub-resource. Can you take a note of that so that the next time they try to access it, we allow them to do so? And that's exactly what Permit does, is we can store all of this ownership information directly in Permit. That frees us up to say, okay, whenever a user creates something, let's just tell Permit about it. And then whenever we need to go and check if they have permissions, we just ask Permit. That way we can actually focus on the application behavior as well as functionality, rather than thinking about how all of these somewhat disjointed systems are interacting with each other all the time. That gave us a lot of time back to actually focus on building features, which means our customers are happier because they're seeing updates every single week. We don't have quantitative metrics. We're a pretty small startup for things like development time, but qualitatively, I can definitely tell you that I'm not spending as much time thinking about how all of these systems are linked together in order to grant access. But instead, I'm just focused on, all right, let's get the thing working, and then let's add a permission right before we allow the user to talk to the API. That's about it. We plan on adding Permit to all of our future routes because by having Permit, we don't have to negotiate with our product team on whether or not adding security is going to add latency. And we don't have to incur that technical debt of adding complexity to our application code just by having security. It's no longer a negotiation, and we can just unilaterally add it to every single route, sometimes even with 1 or 2 lines of code or a decorator. So permit will be with us for a very, very long time. Working with the permit team, we get a lot of support via the Slack channel, and we also have a cross-Slack integration. It feels like the team is always available, and there's always folks online asking questions, getting support, getting things fixed. We've never had a problem trying to find someone at Permit willing to talk to us. Building great security is hard and time-consuming, but is absolutely necessary. I think everyone can build great security. I honestly believe that. But it might not be worth your time to go and build a great security for every new project that you start. I would also say that if you make security easy to understand, easy to use, and fast, then by default, you have great security because people are more likely to add security to your application if they know how easy it is to add security. So ease of use is just as important as complexity.